Meal planning is important because it prevents us from being a disappointed wreck when dinner time comes around and we have no clue what to make, or even if we have the ingredients to make the meal. It's a time and a money saver, but most importantly, it frees up valuable brain space. Creating a meal plan prepares us for the week to come and gives us peace of mind that we're organized and can feed ourselves and our family. That's why I do it, and that's why Plan to Eat helps me do it. Your subscription includes access to the Plan to Eat website and fully featured mobile apps on iOS and Android. And Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, the ones your family loves and that fit your dietary preferences and needs. And you can create a meal plan around your schedule. Then what happens is the Plan to Eat software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. So sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/timecrafting. That's plantoeat.com/timecrafting. The coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. It's valid for new customers only. Give Plan to Eat a try today. I'm Mike Vardy, and this is the Productivityist Podcast. Welcome to the Productivityist Podcast. I am your host, Mike Vardy, and this week on the show, Mike Williams. He is the co-author of Getting Things Done for Teens, Take Control of Your Life in a Distracting World. And he is an accomplished author, speaker, productivity thought leader. In fact, he is the former CEO of the David Allen Company. He was the CEO from 2010 to 2016. He has just a ton of experience in the realm of personal productivity. And I was really, really pleased to get the chance to talk with him again. I spoke with him years ago on one of my older podcasts. So it was a good time for us to catch up, especially with this book coming out. Just a note before we jump into this episode of the podcast, it seems as if, once again, and this has happened a few times, but very rarely, the microphone selection defaulted back to my internal mic instead of this very mic that you're listening to right now, which is my blue microphone, which I have the Blue Yeti Pro. So we've done our best. Big thanks to John for bumping things up and making it sound better. But you will hear some shallowness in my voice in this episode during the recording. Sorry, that's pretty much all I can say. But again, great conversation this week. So I hope you stay tuned, and let's just get on with the show. I would like to welcome Mike Williams to the Productivityist Podcast. Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Mike, it's a pleasure to be here. Can't wait to talk to you and see what you've been up to.
So it's been a while since we spoke. The last time we spoke was when I did the old Productivardy podcast way back before Productivityist was even a thing. I think Productivardy was like kind of my shift from Vardy.me to Productivityist, which of course is going to be transitioning soon as well. But I'll talk more about that after we go off the air. But I'm holding in my hands right now. It's a rather dog-eared and I think it's got like I want to say it's got that classic like Starbucks stain on the cover now. Getting Things Done for Teens, Take Control of Your Life in a Distracting World, and I've got an uncorrected proof. But I wasn't the one that only went through this book, because when I got this from you and your publisher, and I saw it was for teens, I'm like, I have the perfect guinea pig for this. And my daughter Grace actually went through this book. So I'm going to get into her questions a little bit later, because she has some questions, as do I. But my first question is, what was the impetus for you to write this book for this audience?
Good question. There's a couple different ones. So the first one was after I first discovered Getting Things Done around 2004 and started implementing the practices in my life and the principles, and they were just working. I wondered to myself, if these truly are principles, then principles should be able to be applied in a whole host of situations. So my kids at the time were age 8 and age 4. And so the first thing I played with and tried on my kids without telling them they were doing GTD was to put a label on a bucket and to put something in the bucket. And at the time, we were living in the Northeast, and the labels were, hats, gloves, and mittens. And I was wondering if that would work. And I had them create their own labels. So their brains had to create the labels, their brains had to put it on the bucket, and their brains had to put the respective things in the buckets. And my son at the time wasn't writing, but he was beginning to draw. So he kind of drew a blob, and a blob and put it on his buckets. And my daughter, who was 8, was drawing words and nice pictures. So hers actually looked like hats, gloves, and mittens and such. But the doggone principle worked. So we quickly cleaned up our mudroom in the Northeast. And then I was off and running. I'm like, wow, this stuff works. So I just kept on running little experiments and trying them with my kids, and then they worked. Part B of this story is after I became, CEO of the David Allen Company, there's a whole generation of GTDers like you and I that have gone through the system that had done similar experiments. And this stuff was just working. So hats off to the first generation of innovators and experimenters in this space, because the book really kind of harvests, a round of stories that people have been telling us about and sharing with us, and things that have worked for teens. And it also creates a common foundation, language, and function and form that you can share with your kids, because don't tell anybody the secret, but the same process we use to coach CEOs and 16-year-olds and less is exactly the same. What changes is context and content.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when you're talking about the content, I think the primary thing is language, because as my daughter went through this book, she was explaining to me, like, for example, the horizons of focus for us would be the levels of focus, right? So there were some things that when I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, this is just different phrasing. Like, let's talk about the ready states, because that was something that I didn't really. I mean, in classic getting things done, I'm like, ready states, and when she described it, I knew what she was talking about. But for those who don't know, could you dive into that a little bit? Because that's something that she kept coming back to me with through the book. She goes, can you tell me about the ready stuff? She got it. There's actually a post-it note. She goes, oh, I get it now. There's a bunch of little post-it notes that I had her put throughout the book, and I'll regale some of those to you in a little bit. But can you talk a little bit about the ready states and getting into that phrasing?
Yeah. So the one of the first contexts is with kids going through this range, which we targeted at teens, which starts at about 13 and ends at 19. It's a very dynamic range. So you can picture, using the horizons of focus or the levels of focus, you can picture your kids taking on these new areas of focus as they get older. So right now the school structure might be really helping them organize their school day, their school work. But as you progress to higher levels, you're going to have to make it up and make it happen and track your own time. So the level of intensity changes over time. Now, getting back to your question about the ready state, I guess the adult equivalent of the ready state is, am I clear? Am I present? Am I ready to go? So am I ready to play with my friends? Number one. Or do I have homework hanging over my head that I need to do? Am I ready to make the leap from middle school to high school? So that's kind of a higher level perspective state of ready. And then towards the end, am I ready to leave my home, my house, and go off to work or go off to college? Do I know how to facilitate my own trusted system, or am I still dependent on my parents to be my trusted system? So the ready state, has a bunch of different contexts. Another example is if you're in sport and you're playing, am I ready to start at the beginning of my track event? Am I ready to sink this free throw if I'm in basketball, or am I distracted by things? So the ready state is our kind of grounding point to ask people, are you ready? If not, why not? And then start the journey back to what's distracting you and figure it out where the GTD process comes into play.
One of the things that she brought up, which I really liked, was, and I'm reading the post-it note right now, is yes, I like that he's bringing this up. He's being both of you. Bottom paragraphs. So talking about complexity and how it shows up faster than they're, again, ready to handle. Can you again, stress comes up a lot in this book because she was talking about like the different areas of stress. She said that again, as a 13-year-old, she literally is just in grade 7 going into grade 8, and one of the you've talked about the sources of stress for teens. She says, I have felt all of these in the past 30 days. So can you, for those that are kind of thinking, hey, I could get my kids definitely feel stress and I don't know how they deal. How can getting things done for teens help with dealing with complexity that's coming faster than they can handle, which is a source of stress, as well as some of the other stresses that are coming their way every single day?
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. So being a teen, going back to whatever time you want to go back to, has its own normal stresses. So I call that like old school teen stresses, right? And now, with the advent of phones and digital media and things like that, some of those old school stressors can get amplified, and the velocity that they're coming at us is immensely higher than it was before. So things like the social media apps that kids are using is another kind of invisible social network that didn't used to exist, but definitely exists now. And the middle school years are interesting years too, because typically this is around the first time kids get access to these social networks. They're starting to get access, and then the social pressure to get on them goes higher. Then kids are figuring out how to use them and how to exist in this space. And then, there's good experiences and there's bad experiences. There are experiences that only your teens know and the adults don't know. And then there are teens that they let you, experiences that they let you know about. So there's a heck of a lot of information coming through those channels. Now, as you progress through time, experience is a great teacher. So you start to gain perspective on your relationship with social media. So teens can self-regulate, or sometimes they need, the support of a caring adult to help them regulate what's the appropriate amount to be on social media and that kind of stuff. So as far as sources of stress, you've got the old school stress, you've got the digital channels amplifying it, and then the content of the stress can be any of the traditional things. It could be, I've got so much on my plate, I've got so much homework, I've got social stress going on, I'm being bullied, I've got creative stress, I've got all this stuff I want to express, how do I express it? So all these different kinds of things can be stress. Some of the stress can lead toward distress, and some of the stress can lean towards something called eustress, which is creative stress. So, it's teasing it all out, and it's so individual for every single person on which side you're at. But in the book, we do have a little diagram that talks about your complexity of life, and do you feel like you can handle it? So at any point in time, as you progress through your teen years, you can always revisit that map and say, am I more on the really stressed out anxiety state, or am I simply bored out of my mind, which is another unfavorable state? And how do I harness my creativity to get out of that state?
It's as we're going through the book and as we're looking at this, I'm looking at this book and I'm thinking, speaking of social media, and some parents just have no concept of what's going on or how to use the tools. Technology is a foreign object to them. I mean, my daughter really is not a fan of the fact that I know a lot of, it's a double-edged sword. She goes, wow, my dad's like, he's verified on Twitter and he knows stuff and all that. But also it's really not fun when I'm the one that can say, hey, let me check your battery and let me check your settings and see how much time you're spending on Instagram. Let me see, oh, look, there's new iOS time management. She goes, what does that mean? Is that good? I'm like, for me, it is. I don't know if it's good for you. We'll see. So, I mean, there is that level of knowledge and understanding that parents have when it comes to tech. But as I'm going through this book, there are things in here that this book, while designed for teens, I can tell, like the diagramming you've talked about, the labs in the back, like adults would stand to do well by doing this with their teens, I would think, because they can adopt, as we know, GTD can be adopted by anybody, really. Like you said, it's context and content, right?
Yeah. So the book was designed for a caring adult to either hand to a teen or work with a teen. And as you can probably see, you can probably use it in a family dynamic if you've got more people. And so there's different levels of complexity here. A teen can grab this on their own, and it's kind of like a packet of seeds. And some seeds will grow immediately, and some need the right conditions to grow. So going back to my point earlier, some of the stuff in the book may need, the teen may need to be feeling more heat and more pressure on what they need to manage in order to appreciate that section. Now, when you're working with a teen as an individual, that's one thing. I agree with you. I think this might be a really good way for adults to get regrounded in the principle. And then if you get a teen and an adult working together, they can play with the principles together and see what works for them. I think one of the challenges the adults may have is to remember what it's like to be a beginner, a first timer. And not only with the GTD content, but with life. Like I remember when I was working with my daughter on an 8th grade project, and we had called a bunch of our adult friends to say, Hannah's going to call you and ask you some questions. But when I was working with Hannah, she was afraid, resistant to make phone calls to adults. She had never done it before. It was a first-time experience. But we as adults, we've done thousands and thousands of phone calls. So we're like, just do it. Just, make the call. But that's where we got to go back and have deeper empathy and say, I got to go back to a beginner's mind. I got to create a little space for people to discover their way, make mistakes, because the mistakes are the teachers. And that's a level of discernment that we need to have. But in collaboration, for example, if you and your daughter both did a mind sweep, but instead of you coaching your daughter through the mind sweep, she coached you on clarifying your list first, and maybe got a little bonus in her, allowance or something like that, then she might be attracted to helping you clear your bucket out. And oh, by the way, start learning about the process so she can see it at work. Typically, we do it the other way around. We teach the kids. But I think this book creates the conditions for the kids to teach the adults as well.
I agree. And actually, one of the things that I found was, like I said, when I got this book, I said, I've been talking about this stuff. I live and breathe this stuff, as do you. I'm not the best person necessarily to teach her, because we have one relationship, whereas and I mean, one of the things that she was highlighting in here were the quotations. Emma Watson's got a quote in here. There's a lot of these, and one of the things she said is the brain science that you talk about. She goes, I think this is exactly what she said. She said, I like the brain science because it doesn't make me question him. So I mean, when you're, I think that's the other thing, is that if you are well seasoned like I am, and you've got you have ways that work for you, and there might be some resistance to give, to pass on the book and say, hey, you check it out and let me know what you think. And come back to me with stuff. It was great because she came back, because I love this idea of next actions. She goes, I don't know what to do with open loops. Like, what are open loops? And we discussed them. And then she realized what they were. It was a really cool experience because the material was accessible. And again, like any getting things done book that I've read, is that it's not something that you're going to just read once and be done with. Like, you can revisit it and review it and refine it along the way.
Well, I tell Grace, give her a high five for me, because I really appreciate her feedback. And the book was designed not to tell kids what to do, what to tell teens what to do, but to lay out, principles that they might want to test. At its best and at its simplest, GTD is just a series of well-placed questions. And the answers to the questions are within you, within the person, whether you be a CEO, a mom, a dad, or a teen or younger than a teen. There are answers to the questions within you. So what's the next action is a very fundamental question that creates momentum. And if there's just one thing that kids get from the book, if they just get that one question and they can understand how to answer it appropriately, there's going to be a lot more momentum on creative ideas, on how to resolve a problem, on how to do homework, on how to pick up that random sock that's been there for hours or days. What's the next action? And then I think one of the other power questions right after that is, can I do this in under 2 minutes? So I think in this space, that 2-minute rule is something that can get exercised to demonstrate that actions don't necessarily need to take a lot of time. Some of them will. Like if I need to write a book report, I need to schedule some time and block it out and work at it. But some are just simple things that if you did in under 2 minutes and use a 2-minute rule, boy, your mom, dad, or person who's caring for you would really appreciate the fact that you're kind of a go-getter doer and things don't lay around.
Well, here's the quote she had about, I'm looking at the page that you talk about, what's the next action. She put on a post note, this is a smart tactic. I think this will help and maybe work. So without prompting, it's just one of those things that she sees and she's definitely adhering towards. Now I want to dive into something that was a bit contentious for her, and not just her, but her friend actually took a look too. And the phone situation, because we all know, and I think it is a matter to do with, like you said, these kids. I mean, our kids are just now, like at that 13 years of age, they are just starting to get into the Instagram, the Snapchat, all that stuff. I mean, Facebook, my daughter's not on yet, and really, honestly, data's shown that teenagers are not really all that interested in Facebook anyway. They're more interested in like WhatsApp and Instagram and things like that. One of the things that they both mentioned, and they actually took issue with, was the idea that the phone is a huge problem. Now, let me preface this, because it wasn't the way that they phrased it wasn't. They didn't recognize that there were some issues with it. They may not. The generalization might have been what kind of put them into that state, but also the fact that they were very quick to judge. It actually was quite funny, because last night, as my daughter was saying this, her uncle was sitting across the room from us, and he was on his phone. She said, adults do this just as much as we do, if not more. So I want to touch on the phone issue in general, like this device and these notifications. How are you able to? Because I wonder if people are reading that, if the teens get into this, and it's presented pretty early on in the book. How would you, if you could talk to a teenager and say, look, this is how phones and devices can help, and this is how they can harm, and here's what we were putting out there for it. And also maybe put their minds at ease that it's not just them, because I think that was the biggest thing. And I'm like, all right, I'll talk to Mike about that and see what he has to say.
Well, that's, Grace's and her friends' insights. Those are really cool and valuable insights, because if the phone is a tool, and if that tool is not distracting you and you've got a great relationship with it, then you're in harmony with your tool. No issue. As complexity rises and more apps get on your phone and more content starts going through those apps, then the persistent use of that tool over time changes the way that you engage with the world. That's what the research shows. Actually, have a TEDx talk out there called "Your Brain is Being Tricked by Design," and basically, every little square on your phone is backed up by billions of dollars of market capitalization and research and brain scientists to attract you to using that phone. So again, if they're just first entering this playing field, they may not feel it as much, but later on down the road, you may start experiencing things like broken Snapchat streaks and being emotionally upset that it got broken. And then you have to start to step back and say, whoa, what just happened there? And things like that start to emerge later on. Maybe they're not there yet. But I would invite Grace to just keep in conversation with me because I'd love her perspective on this over time, and I'd invite her to maintain that healthy relationship with her phone, and I hope she does it for all eternity, and also to look around at other teens in different age groups and see what she notices. Um, I think that would be the best experiment. Maybe someday that could even be a school project for her.
Yeah, and I think that the point you're making, which is absolutely true, is when anybody adopts new technology or these, I think that the issue is also with older people. Like my mom, as soon as she got her device, iPad and stuff, she is spending a lot more time on social media. I mean, time is, for lack of a better term, not as much of an issue because we're tired and all that stuff. But I think it's human nature to say, hey, people want connection. It's when do you connect with through tools just in a way that is not beneficial per se. Let's just use that as a general overarching principle versus when is it useful for you to connect with yourself and the things that you need to do, your next actions. So that way you can actually move forward and the tools don't get in the way or they don't lead you down the wrong path. I think that's one example. A tool that my daughter loves is this idea of she is relentless at capture. And I think that's something that I've ingrained in her since day one. And she loved the idea. She actually says here about the putting a capture tool close to you, like a simple pad of paper. She goes, I think I will try this. It is a very cool, smart idea. So there's a lot of, the great thing is that as I look through the book and as I went through it, I'm like, all the principles of getting things done are in here and done in such a way that like my daughter, who again, literally as we're recording this is 6 months into being a teenager, although she's a bit of an old soul, I'll give her that. She gravitated towards it. Not unlike what I've seen with other people who I've talked to about, productivity methodologies and such, she wasn't thrilled with the concept at first because it was a bit of a mind shift. But as she got through the first 20, 30, 40, all of a sudden, she handed me the book. She goes, okay, I'm ready to talk to you about the questions I have. And I said, oh, you're done? And she goes, yeah, I didn't do the labs because, we didn't have time for me to do them. But she goes, here's all the Post-its, and there's Post-its throughout this thing. So you've got one reader right out of the gate. And I know that the idea of getting things done is not just set up for it's anybody, like you said, anybody can buy into it. You've just got to invest the time and give it a go.
Yeah. And what you're experiencing now with your daughter is what I hope, we start to experience worldwide where other teens are putting their Post-it notes in. And, part of the reason that this book exists is an excuse to capture more stories from the next generation. And then the generation after that, and then the generation after that. I hope that someday when some teen is kind of stressed out on Mars, that they have a capture tool, they capture it, and they process it. And they'll be looking at adults and saying, why would you ever want to keep something in your brain? Out so you're not stressed about it. I don't understand your behavior.
Very, very, very true. Mike, the book is out now. Getting Things Done for Teens, Take Control of Your Life in a Distracting World, written by yours truly and Mark Wallace. Inspired by the work of David Allen, building upon the work of David Allen, who we just had on last week. Where can people get this book and where can people keep up with what you're doing as well?
Yeah, so, the work was, first of all and foremost, inspired by the first generation of GTD users who are applying GTD principles with their families and saying, hey, when are you going to get this book out? We're glad the book is out. You can get the book at any major book retailer such as Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And you can find me, probably the best place to find me is on Twitter at GTDMW.
Awesome, Mike. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today on the Productivityist podcast.
Thanks for having me. Tell Grace, thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to get a copy of all her sticky notes and give her a high five for me, please.
Will do. And that's the end of the show. That's the end of the discussion. And I'd like to thank Mike Williams for joining me this week on the podcast. I'd like to thank John Polstra for producing the show. He puts all of the show stuff together. And I'd like to thank the members of my team for helping make this show happen, as well as you for listening. Now, if you want to get all of the show notes and relevant links we discussed, you can look that up at productivityist.com/podcast 204. That's the URL. Or you can do that in the podcast listening app of your choice. And I encourage you, if you're not already doing so, subscribe to the podcast. And if you're already doing that and you haven't done the rating and review thing yet, I'd love it if you do that as well. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. Until next time, I am Mike Vardy, the host of the Productivityist podcast, reminding you to stop guessing and start going.